Ilya's mother won't let him leave after he failed his exams. He explains he only failed Roman philology, but promises to retake it in 2 weeks. Still, she refuses to let him out until he passes all his exams. Ilya tries to soften her by being extra kind, hoping it will change her mind. However, she reminds him of all the effort she put into getting him into a good university. She then tells him to go to his room. Ilya laughs bitterly, but eventually agrees. While his mother keeps watch, Ilya calls his friend to complain about being locked up. His mother hears him and feels guilty. Frustrated, Ilya vents by scribbling angrily on a self-portrait sketch. When he hears his mother go into the bathroom, he quickly tries to sneak out, but she catches him. She grabs his coat, but he pulls it away, making her stumble. He apologizes, but still leaves the house. Once outside, Ilya meets his girlfriend Vera, and they enjoy their time together on the train, then head to a club where they meet their friend Seryoga. While Ilya steps away to get drinks, the police raid the club. Vera is arrested for suspicion of possessing illegal substances, and Ilya tries to defend her, but Officer Pyotr mocks him. When Ilya insists on standing up for Vera, Pyotr arrests him for resisting. In the back of the club, the police find drugs in Ilya's pocket. He denies that it's his, but Pyotr laughs and arrests him. 7 years later, Ilya is released from prison. He finds out his mother passed away 2 days ago. In shock, he searches the apartment for her and calls the hospital, who confirm her death. He then sees his room untouched, just as it was when he left, and finds the sketch he drew that night. His mother's homemade soup is still there, so he eats it quietly, grieving. Ilya, drunk, visits Vera, but she reminds him that they've broken up and that she's moved on. She tells him that when she got arrested, she didn't ask for his help. Ilya says he couldn't just let them take her, fearing what might happen to her. Vera tells him that the police only searched her and let her go. Later, Seryoga comes to visit Ilya, still confused about why Ilya was arrested. Ilya coldly says it was because of Pyotr, but Seryoga is still unclear. Ilya then admits that he wanted to end his life after he was locked up, but his mother told him they couldn't meet again in the afterlife if he did. Ilya borrows Seryoga's phone to look for Pyotr online and sees that the officer is living a life Ilya could have had. Just then, Seryoga gets a message and excuses himself to go back to his kids, promising to meet Ilya again soon. With his mother gone and Vera moved on, Ilya becomes fixated on Pyotr, the man who ruined his life. He goes to a club where Pyotr posted about online and approaches him, but Pyotr doesn't remember him. Ilya then pretends to be someone Pyotr sold items to, and his lie works. Pyotr leads him to a dark fire escape to make a deal. When they get there, Ilya reveals that he's the man Pyotr set up 7 years ago. Pyotr mocks him and tells him to go back to his mother. This frustrates Ilya, and he starts pushing him, blaming him for his mother's death. Pyotr pulls out a gun, but Ilya kicks it away. Pyotr tries to call for help, but Ilya pushes him again, making him drop the phone. Ilya then slams Pyotr's head against the stairs, accidentally causing his death. Panicking, Ilya runs away but returns, realizing he could go back to prison if anyone finds out. He takes Pyotr's phone and drops the body into a manhole. At home, he quickly cleans up the blood but stops when he hears a phone ringing. Ilya remembers that he took Pyotr's phone. Overcome by everything that happened, he collapses on his couch. The next day, he wakes up and finds Pyotr's gun on the table, not recalling taking it. He hides it and then checks the phone, remembering the PIN code from last night. He manages to open the messages and sees one from a client Pyotr was supposed to meet. Ilya replies, pretending Pyotr is still alive. He keeps looking through the messages and finds one from Pyotr's supplier who he was supposed to meet next week. Then, a man named Dennis calls, but Ilya ignores it. He opens another message from a client named Maga, offering 300,000 euros for Pyotr's product. The phone dies, so Ilya hides the gun in a boot, then leaves to buy a charger. Outside, he runs into someone from the funeral home, reminding him to pick up his mother's body from the morgue. He tells them he doesn't have the money for a funeral and leaves. After buying the charger, Ilya listens to a voicemail from Pyotr's mother, who is worried about her son and someone named Nina. To avoid her calling again, Ilya texts her, saying he's on a job and can't talk. Later, Ilya can't stop thinking about Pyotr's death. He updates his self-portrait, showing how he feels about himself now. In the evening, Pyotr's mother messages again, asking about Nina. Ilya searches for her on the phone and learns that Nina is Pyotr's ex-girlfriend. He watches videos of them together, wondering if this should have been his life with Vera. In one video, a drunk Nina dances and sings, but then she stumbles. Dennis calls the phone again, and Ilya ignores the call. Dennis then texts, asking what assignment Ilya was talking about and threatening Pyotr for not answering him. When Dennis calls again, Ilya rushes to the bathroom and flushes the toilet repeatedly, pretending to be a sick Pyotr. Dennis buys the story but reminds him to pick up supplies on Monday. He also sends his regards to Pyotr's father before ending the call. Ilya, curious, checks the phone and finds out that Pyotr's father is a general major. He watches a video of Pyotr's family having dinner with Lieutenant Major Boris and his daughter Ksenia. Ilya also discovers that Pyotr's father disowned him after a recent argument. This causes Ilya to panic again, fearing that Pyotr's father will have him executed for the murder instead of just sending him to prison. In an attempt to calm his nerves, Ilya goes to a liquor store but finds it closed. Frustrated, he kicks the door, which catches the attention of a nearby officer. Ilya quickly runs away, trying to avoid getting caught again. He escapes into an apartment building and hides there until the police leave. While hiding, he reads on the phone that Nina and Pyotr broke up when she found out about his relationship with Ksenia. The next day, Ilya goes to the hospital and again tells them he doesn't have the money to bury his mother yet. The coroner warns him that he'll be charged if he doesn't collect her within 7 days. Ilya then sees his mother's body and apologizes for being late, promising to handle everything soon. Before leaving, the doctor suggests holding her funeral at a chapel since she was religious. However, Ilya doesn't think it matters, believing everyone ends up in the same place. As he walks home, Ilya passes a travel agency and wonders if he should leave and go somewhere else. Galia, the travel agent, helps Ilya despite his past and lack of a passport. She confirms he's free to travel and gives him a contact for the Federal Migration Service to help with his passport, offering hope for his future. As he leaves, Ilya gets a voicemail from Pyotr's mother, saying Nina is about to have surgery. He reads an email from Pyotr, who admits he wasn't ready to be a father, fearing he'd be like his own father. Pyotr loved Nina but didn't think he could raise a child. He thought of fatherhood as a mess, but considered it might change him. Ilya visits the hospital, learns Nina is scheduled for an abortion, and sees her for the first time. He listens to Pyotr's final message, where Pyotr says he changed his mind about having a family. Ilya finishes the message and sends it. Ilya then avoids Nina when she calls Pyotr. On the bus, he hears Nina's voicemail saying she's keeping the child and reassures Pyotr's mother. Later, Ilya visits Seryoga and nervously asks to borrow money. Stasha refuses, saying they need it for their children. Ilya overhears Seryoga and Stasha arguing and decides to leave. He goes to the spot where Pyotr died, opens the manhole, and searches Pyotr's body for money, finding some substances. Just as he's about to leave, the car owners return. They cover the open manhole and spend time in the car, which Ilya can hear from underground. Stuck, Ilya talks to Pyotr's body, telling him he convinced Nina to keep the baby. He reads a message from Pyotr's mother aloud, which discusses Pyotr's struggles with his father's expectations, his law studies, and his decision to be with Nina. Ilya eventually climbs out and feels conflicted about Pyotr's character. He messages his mother, apologizing and saying he's not as bad as he thought. Ilya offers supplies to one of Pyotr's clients for money, then apologizes to Pyotr's father, hoping to give him peace. The general major angrily responds, blaming Ilya for ruining his career. The next day, Dennis sends more messages. Dennis threatens to release a video that would ruin Pyotr's life, his father's, and Boris's careers. With this looming over him, Ilya meets a client, Anton, and tells him he's Pyotr's middleman. Anton warns him to avoid doing the deal in the open and suggests using a bathroom for privacy. After the exchange, Ilya tries to contact the migration office, but Dennis interrupts, threatening to find him. Ilya turns his phone to airplane mode to avoid being tracked and works on his passport. He later messages Dennis, claiming Pyotr went out of town after drinking, then turns off his phone. Back home, Ilya notices his mother's bedroom door closing and believes she's punishing him. He becomes distressed, blaming Pyotr and their parents for their troubles. When he opens the door, he realizes his mother is gone, deepening his anxiety. Ilya replies to Pyotr's father, saying Pyotr and Nina are having a child. The general calls, but Ilya rejects it, leaving a voicemail criticizing him. Ilya then gets a flirtatious message from Nina, thinking she's made up with Pyotr. He reflects on his and Pyotr's lives and remembers Maga's €300,000 offer and Denis's threat. To clear his mind, Ilya watches a video of Nina and Pyotr. The next day, he texts Maga to say a middleman will deliver the product. However, Pyotr's mother and Nina start worrying about Pyotr's absence, so Ilya agrees to meet Nina. At dinner, Ilya responds to Nina's messages as Pyotr and even proposes to her through text. Just then, Denis texts, saying he's found him, and Ilya spots a thug searching the place. He switches the phone to airplane mode and leaves quietly, unnoticed. Ilya heads to an underground club, watches Nina's dance video, and loses himself in the music until he's kicked out. After checking his phone, he hears a voicemail from Maga and texts Pyotr's father, telling him that Pyotr proposed to Nina for their child's sake. The general invites them to meet on his birthday, which Ilya sees as a chance for reconciliation. He thanks him and returns the phone to the manhole. The next day, Ilya picks up his passport and learns that Pyotr's body was found. Fearing capture, he books a flight to Colombia. He then meets Maga, who gives him €300,000, warning that if the product isn't delivered soon, he'll go after Nina. This frightens Ilya as he walks out of the hotel. Concerned for her safety, he decides to return to the hotel and tells Maga's bodyguard that the deal is cancelled because Pyotr has been killed. He then returns the money to ensure that Nina is protected. Now broke again, he goes to the travel agency to cancel his trip. Galia tries to suggest cheaper travel options, and he listens as she talks about beautiful places he may never get to visit. He promises to return later when he decides, thanks her, and leaves. Next, Ilya goes to the morgue to visit his mother. However, he can't bring himself to take her yet. Instead, he kisses her forehead and says goodbye. When he returns home, he notices a black van parked outside. He decides to ignore it and goes back to his apartment. While there, he recalls the argument he had with his mother the night he went to the club. Accepting his situation, he pours a bowl of his mother's last soup and eats. Soon he hears the doorbell and sees police outside. Still, he finishes his meal, replaying the argument in his mind. Realizing he's the only one responsible for his situation, he goes to confront the person he believes is to blame for it all. He takes Pyotr's gun and arranges his mother's religious items before sitting down and aiming at his head. Just before pulling the trigger, he remembers his mother's belief about the afterlife. Holding on to the hope that he might meet her again, Ilya instead shouts at the officers and fires a few warning shots to scare them. He then returns to his sketch and erases the messy parts he had drawn for himself. Finally, Ilya opens his window and begins shooting at the officers, prompting them to return fire, showing the damaged person he's become for not listening to his mother. Years later, Nina and her daughter visit Ilya's grave. Nina has figured out that Ilya was the one who convinced her to keep the child, not Pyotr.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.